My name is Heather Wokusch, and thank you so much for joining us. Now, today we're going to talk about an issue that is not reported nearly enough in the media, and that is the ongoing controversy that has plagued New York University these past years. Now, there is a treasure trove, a cornucopia of very, very serious topics that we really must discuss, and we are delighted to be joined today by Andrew Berman, who is the Executive Director of the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. We are also joined by Dr. Michael Rectenwald, who is a member of the New York faculty against the Sexton Plan. And we are also joined by Christy Thornton, who is a graduate student at NYU. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not a student at NYU, and I don't work there, but what's going on at NYU, I think, is critical for so many reasons, and I've been following it for years. We had the pleasure of speaking last year about this, but it just keeps going on. And so what I would like to do to start off is give you my very brief idea for what I see is happening, and then tell me if you think it is correct. Okay, so it's like a hydra. You've got, on the one hand, you've got this so-called Sexton Plan, which would not only expand, horrifically into beautiful areas of Greenwich Village, but also possibly, alienate students who wants to study in the construction zone. This is one area you've got going on. The second is you have corruption, it looks like, or certainly debatable moral practices regarding favored faculty and favored staff getting amazing loans for vacation homes, and the New York Times reported on this, for example, and getting all kinds of special perks. Meanwhile, students are struggling under, amazing debt. You've got a debt crisis there. And also, NYU was recently voted the #1 school for wasteful spending by generation progress. You've got also this global expansion with somehow, campuses in Shanghai and Abu Dhabi. And in looking at this from the outside, it looks, one, confused. It looks also somewhat it looks to be a crisis, not only a crisis of education, but a crisis of democracy and certainly some kind of moral questioning going involved. So this is my brief overview. Did I leave anything out, or did I get anything wrong?
Well, I would say the one thing that gets left out of that is the ongoing labor struggles that happen at NYU.
Okay.
NYU was the first private university to actually recognize a graduate student union and set a terrific precedent there. And so the graduate students at NYU worked under a contract for 3 years until that contract expired.
Okay.
And when that contract expired, NYU decided not to renegotiate. And so since 2005 has not recognized its graduate student workers union, despite the Graduate Student Workers Union having a majority on campus.
What does that actually mean?
NYU relies on graduate student labor for a lot of kinds of things. Graduate students teach classes, they perform labor as research assistants, especially in the hard sciences, they work in laboratories, those sorts of things. Prior to the existence of the Graduate Student Union, which is called GSOC, the Graduate Student Organizing Committee, the wages that they had, the job stability, the health care, all of those things were pretty dismal. And the union was actually able to bring in great increases in those wages, in the protections, in the benefits that graduate students receive. But NYU unilaterally deciding to get rid of the Graduate Students Union, to not recognize and negotiate a new contract, has meant that once again graduate workers at NYU are completely beholden to the whims of the university. We have none of the protections of collective bargaining.
So this means you don't get the $72 million for your vacation home?
We do. None of the graduate students have any vacation homes in Connecticut. I can assure you.
There goes
of
the
that.
Hamptons.
Yeah.
But my question is, what reason did they give for not extending this?
The administration has a philosophy that allowing the union to kind of come between the sacred relationship of graduate students and our mentors, this is kind of one of the last apprenticeship programs that exists in any industry, right? And that by allowing the union to insert itself in between that sacred relationship, that we're losing something about the education process. And what the union has always argued is that we are workers. We are workers on whom the university relies, and that we should be allowed to organize and protect ourselves as workers because the university asks us to work.
you mentioned in a recent article with apartheid in the title, and
Yes.
it talked about, the contract workers versus, some of the higher professors. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think the major division in the university is not between contract professors and tenured professors, but between the top administrators and a very, very small select group of faculty in medical school and the law school. Between that small group and the rest of the whole faculty at large and the staff, I mean, this is a huge divide. We're talking about salaries that, in the millions, and many of them. And also vacation homes, loans for vacation homes and first homes, many of which are forgiven to at least 25%, I believe, and all kinds of other perks and bonuses and termination bonuses for people that are leaving voluntarily of $700,000. All kinds of shenanigans between NYU and Citibank in terms of Jack Lew and the lending processes that happened there, which were investigated by the Attorney General of New York, and with the kickbacks that were coming back to NYU. As you mentioned, there's a lot of ethical issues at stake in the university. There seems to be a lot of legerdemain going on regarding money, keeping balls in the air, as much growth as possible in order to obfuscate the processes that are happening. And to have this pro-growth mentality, I believe, has to do with assuaging a lot of real estate holders that are on the board. As long as a lot of things are moving and it looks like there's this growth and this advancement, then they can justify these bonuses and all these deals that are going on the side.
That's your introduction, Andrew Berman.
The problems coming from the university emanate from the administration. It's the problems that they have with their own faculty, with their students, with the surrounding community. And the one thing that I would add to the introduction you gave is the enablers. The enablers of the university administration's terrible policies, this sort of manifest destiny notion that they have, as if it's from high above, this message has come down that they must expand not only across Greenwich Village but across the world. Then it doesn't matter how much it costs, it doesn't matter what it does to the neighborhood they've been located in for almost 200 years. It doesn't matter what it does to the students who have such great difficulty paying for it. The enablers, unfortunately, have been our city officials, for whom the board, which was mentioned of NYU, who's really sort of a who's who of the 1% of the 1%, the titans of industry and real estate in New York, who in some cases benefit themselves financially from the actions that the university is taking, have exerted an enormous amount of influence over city government, which is supposed to be looking at the greater good, but instead has really been serving the good of this very small group of people, approving these plans that would have a devastating impact on the community, as you mentioned, would have a terrible impact on the students and faculty who go to NYU. Simply to fulfill this vision that the university has for itself, that I think a couple of individuals with real estate interests might benefit from, but it's not really clear who else would.
Possibly some people don't know anything about this so-called Sexton Plan and what it is. Can you give us just a little bit of background on that?
The City Council, the City Planning Commission, and the Manhattan Borough President just this past year approved this massive 20-year expansion plan for NYU, where they basically approved the construction of nearly an Empire State Building's worth of space within Greenwich Village. And in order to do that, what they had to do was they had to undo these urban renewal deed restrictions, which was this agreement, sort of a sacred agreement that was made between the city and the people of New York 50 years ago. Land, homes, businesses were taken away from New Yorkers with the notion that this was being done to serve a public good, that it was being taken from people, but it was going to be given back to the people of the city of New York to serve this greater good, an educational good. And what they did was they overturned that agreement in order to allow this 20-year expansion plan to take place. They overturned zoning restrictions that require a certain amount of open space to be maintained in the neighborhood. They overturned other zoning restrictions that limit the density of development that can go on here. So really it was all of these longstanding agreements that were abrogated in order to allow NYU to build what nobody would have ever imagined as the kind of buildings that you would see in Greenwich Village. One of them, which for some reason they've chosen to call the Zipper Building, this truly enormous building that would be the largest structure ever built in Greenwich Village. It would stretch from Bleecker Street to Houston Street, west of Mercer Street. It's called the Zipper Building because it's made of these different interlocking parts that gradually get bigger and bigger and shift back and forth. It would be almost 1 million square feet, which is an unbelievable amount of space for a building in a residential neighborhood. The approvals were granted. It's supposed to take 20 years for them to construct it. So for the people who live in and around this area, the super blocks as they're called around Bleecker and LaGuardia Place, this would be 20 years of construction that would ultimately ruin the neighborhood, but also in the process, people would have to deal with these terrible environmental impacts from so much construction going on for such a long period of time.
And something would have to be ripped down in order to have that building put up.
Well, most of what would be ripped down is open space, trees, grass, and one-story low-rise buildings. And part of the original deal within which this land was given to NYU was it said, NYU, you're going to get to build certain things here that normally people wouldn't get to build. But A, they're going to have to be for educational purposes, and B, they're going to be these big buildings, but they have to be surrounded by open space to sort of balance it out. And that's the deal that the city basically took back with this action. They said some of the buildings don't have to be educational. They said some of the buildings can go on what was supposed to be open space that was going to be preserved in perpetuity. Some of it was going to be on land that NYU didn't own, but publicly owned land that had been used as things like playgrounds and dog runs and places where kids learn to ride their bikes, things like that, in one of the most park-starved neighborhoods in all of New York, statistically speaking. So it's really, you know, it's not only devastating to the neighborhood, but I think it's really devastating to the public trust, what was done here.
One of the other aspects of this is that, like so many things that come from this administration, this was presented to the NYU community, never mind the folks outside of NYU, but as a fait accompli, right? That this plan, this was the way that it was going to be, it had been decided, it was finished, and now here you go, entire NYU community, this is the way the future is going to look. With almost no consultation, especially with the faculty, with other NYU stakeholders, and of course none with the people who live in Greenwich Village around NYU. This was just presented as a done deal, because it was a done deal between the administration and these enablers in city government.
And despite the massive amount of real estate that this entails, it will not meet the needs, the educational needs of NYU, the classroom needs of NYU, because so much of the space is being given over to retail space, hotel space, and things like that. The classroom needs are not going to be adequately met.
What's interesting is meeting those classroom needs could be met certainly in other ways. You know, I remember we were talking, well, why not have some of those students go to the financial district, and then they will, you know, be in an environment that is, you know, perfect, you know, for that. So what I'm hearing, you know, on the broad scale is it's almost like this hierarchical, the elites at the top are kind of, you know, making decisions, putting it down, making a bunch of cash, either off graduate students working and not, you know, having any rights, or, you know, you've got the contract workers working, you know, while some people have vacation homes in the Hamptons. You've got a lot of people making money. I can tell you what makes me, so many things make me angry about this, you know, but one of them, I'm a 30-year educator. I've worked in many countries, and it's a tough job, you know, but it's an important job. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of focus. And when you're focusing on your students and you have to fight against this stuff on the side, that's nonsense.
Right.
And the job that you're doing, you know, in terms of taking care of, you know, preservation of this, there's enough to do there without fighting zipper buildings and that are eating up your parks. And so, you know, it's a ridiculous waste of energy, but the battle that you have been fighting for years and years is critical. I think what happens here is going to really be very, very important as a precedent. So my question is this: if somebody's watching this and thinking, I didn't know that, that's awful, what can I do to help? What can normal people do to help?
Well, there's a lot of different things. I think each of the organizations we represent who are working to fight this plan, for instance, we have a lawsuit that's currently before a judge where we're hoping that she will ultimately decide to strike down or overturn some of these approvals that the city made. So supporting any one of the three organizations is a way of supporting this fight. For the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, you can go to our website, gvshp.org. You can find out about how to get involved, make a contribution, be notified of hearings, demonstrations, rallies, things like that. Right now, unfortunately, it's probably going to come down to whether or not the judge does the right thing in this case and says that these city and state officials acted arbitrarily or through an inappropriate process and knock some of these approvals out. And if they do, given that we will soon have a new mayor, a somewhat new city council, a new borough president, there will be an opportunity to make a real change here. So we're hoping that that will happen.
And who pays for these legal battles? Because they've got a bunch of cash on the other side. How do you fund this?
We've had to raise money on our own.
Okay.
And NYU Faculty Against the Sexton Plan has been raising money. So we are in a fundraising mode as well right now.
How would somebody give you money?
They could go to the website and get in contact with us, and certainly we would be more than happy to discuss it with them.
So the website standupfornyc.com.
Or if NYU Faculty Against the Sexton Plan.
The donations go to legal fights. What other kinds of
The
things?
Faculty Against the Sexton Plan fight is entirely a grassroots fight. There isn't some institutional structure behind it. This is another place in which graduate students have been brought in to actually do some of the day-to-day kind of labor working for this, and some of us just do this on a volunteer basis. All of the faculty who are involved are on an entirely volunteer basis. So the money that has been raised for FASP has entirely gone to these legal battles, making people aware of this campaign. And FASP has, actually been in the forefront of making the faculty at NYU aware of of these struggles and of the Sexton Plan in particular, but also the questions about the global expansion and these other kinds of issues that are all tied in with the compensation packages, these things. Faculty Against the Sexton Plan has really been at the forefront of that struggle, and it is entirely a grassroots volunteer effort on the part of the faculty.
And I understand that after the no confidence vote, they said, okay, he'll leave in 2016, so everything's okay now.
After the 5 no confidence votes. 5 different schools have voted no confidence.
So they said, okay, we're improving our communication. So as somebody who works there, what would you say?
It's kind of hard to read these communications because they're just dictates, and we're told that we're being listened to, but really it's just pro forma. I don't feel like there's any real. In other words, you can have a conversation, but if in advance you preclude the possibility of actually listening to the person's talking and making some decisions based on what they say, then it's not really a conversation. It's just a PR campaign.
Yeah, I would say so.
And that's basically what's going on.
Sexton will step down at the end of this term. He will step down with a huge bonus, a huge length of service bonus, and then his pension will actually be $800,000 a year to not work at NYU. So that will be his retirement. He will live on $800,000 a year, while people who teach at the adjunct rate, like me, get paid $5,000 a course.
While living in NYU housing.
While living in New York City. And so when he does retire, that there are some people who can see this as a victory, that there were 5 schools that had no confidence votes, plus the union of the service employees at NYU. So there is widespread lack of confidence in President Sexton. So there is some ways in which his stepping down in 2016 is a concession. The other concession that the faculty are really calling for is that the chair of the board, Martin Lipton, has been the chair of the board for numerous terms, which is actually against the bylaws of NYU's governance itself. There's supposed to be 1 term for the chair of the board to serve, and he's just stayed on kind of in perpetuity. He said now that he will step down at the end of his next term, but they're going to make sure that they put in place the kinds of institutions and structures that make their vision continue.
So that's the thing. They're going to be sure that they do this. It feels just so elitist, and there's this big divide in here. How can that be solved? What are your ideas?
Well, clearly there's sort of a corporate mentality at a place like NYU. I think what was mentioned before is really key, which is that a lot of this is about they try to give an impression of something being done that's responsive, but in terms of their actual actions, it very, very rarely is. Some people would say Sexton was probably going to leave at the end of this term regardless, and they're sort of presenting it as this great concession in the hopes of sort of quieting people down. certainly, in terms of the community, the university has, unfortunately, a long-standing history of, A, not keeping its commitments, and B, not in any meaningful way listening to the community. And, we have what should be a symbiotic relationship. We benefit from NYU's presence, and the university benefits from being located in the village. We should be working together hand in hand instead of having this vision imposed upon us. And it seems as though the administration of NYU is particularly resistant to the notion of working collaboratively with anyone other than themselves. And certainly this is not the only university in America or in the world that has had tensions around these issues, but NYU does seem to be number one when it comes to this, as they are in so many other areas, many not so good areas like this.
For me, what's interesting, and sorry just for a second, is I have taught university students in Japan and in Austria and in many different countries, and when they think of studying in the States, it's very consistent. And if they think of paying as much as they have to, being international students, it's like, I'm going to go in those hallowed ancient halls, that are so beautiful. And I believe that even when you take the student tour, you go through these old buildings. And so my thing is, if indeed this starts going through, one, the money that this construction is going to take is crazy. I don't know how they're going to do this. Two, who wants to study and who wants to teach in a kind of construction zone? I'm wondering if this could be, don't want to be over dramatic, but like the death of NYU or a very, very serious blow. It's like pardon me for using this analogy, but like a cancer metastasizing. We have to just grow and grow and grow, and you grow and grow and grow to the extent that it's not sustainable, and indeed at some point it's destructive, but the people who did the destruction are making $800,000, So I want to get back to, so we know what the problem is. I want to get back to the solution. Now I understand that tomorrow there's going to be some kind of event.
Yeah, there's going to be a teach-in at
NYU
on campus. And it will be
in the Zipper building?
Not in the Zipper building. Not yet. It will be about the crisis at NYU that entails all of these things. The Sexton Plan, the 5 no confidence votes, plus the union, service unions vote, plus the tuition, the high tuition. I mean, NYU is the most expensive university in the country.
How much would it cost to have
$64,000 a year.
Do you get in a car with that?
Only if you're the president.
Holy crap! And that's no apartment. That's just
that's
no books.
That's the apartment. That'll count your room and board.
It's room and board and tuition. NYU this year was ranked the most expensive university. $64,000.
Which is interesting for me. It just perpetuates this elite system, because who can afford that? Only a very limited number of people. And so you've got the elites here, counting for the elites there is just wrong. This is not public education. It's not education.
And at other schools, at schools that actually are more prestigious than NYU, there is a much higher focus on financial aid. NYU's endowment to student ratio, NYU's endowment is tiny compared to some of these other schools, but rather than focusing on fundraising for that endowment in order to provide financial aid for the students to relieve some of this burden, what they focus on is fundraising to be able to build the 2031 plan, the faculty, the Sexton Plan. And so what you have is a student body that is 50% more indebted than the national average. NYU students graduate with a tremendous amount of debt. And when you speak of metastasizing, one thing that has really metastasized is actually just the tuition to go to NYU as an undergrad. The level that you paid to go, the actual tuition amount that you paid 20 years ago was tiny compared to, the increase has been exponential in how much it costs to go to NYU. And NYU sees that in a lot of ways about increasing its prestige. And it's worked in some ways. In the kind of society that we live in where these things are measured by market values, it has absolutely worked to raise the tuition and make the school more elite in that way. But other elite institutions are making sure, they have a focus on diversity, on making sure that students who come from less fortunate backgrounds can go to those schools so that there is a diversity and they're not creating this class divide. And NYU just doesn't have that focus on financial aid. It has absolutely not been a priority of this president during his term.
Just as a follow-up to that, if you're focusing on these elite people who will pay this, well, they're not going to, study in a construction zone. They'll go to Princeton or someplace else where they can get these old buildings. And so it totally makes no sense. Now, I want to really emphasize the things that we can do. So we can definitely sign up for your email list, and I can tell you I'm on it, I've been on it, it's wonderful. It's really interesting ideas and things that we can do. And again, that is gvshp.org. So basically, I can get information, okay? I can donate money. What else do you think people can do?
I think a really important thing, especially if there are parents who are watching this, who are considering where to send their students to go to school. You know, NYU still draws a huge part of its student body from the New York City area and the surrounding suburbs. So NYU is still very much a higher education institution that is a regional institution in this way. People, the general public needs to make itself aware of what NYU has done, of how high the tuition is, of how low the financial aid is, of the burdens they're placing not only on the tenure track faculty but on the contract faculty. And the more that we can get the word out about the kind of institution that NYU is, and you've seen our legislators begin to be interested in this. Senator Grassley has looked into some of these questions about what these compensation packages look like, about the compensation package for Jack Lew, who's now the Treasury Secretary. I mean, these things are just having implications far beyond NYU. And honestly, that's NYU's plan. NYU has always seen itself, in the time that Sexton has been the president, as being in the vanguard of higher education. And that's why these things matter so much, because NYU actually sees what it's doing as a model for how the higher education sector should work in general. And so it is very much wants other universities to follow its lead. And you're seeing that happen in other places. Yale opening a campus in Singapore after NYU makes the announcement that it's opening a campus in Abu Dhabi is very much of the same kind of ilk. The pushes that NYU is making are being followed throughout higher education. So especially students, potential students and their parents need to make themselves aware of these changes that are going on, not only in private higher education, but the impacts they have on public higher education here as well.
So people need to get informed. You know, I just had the most horrible thought when you were talking. What if Larry Summers does not get the Fed and he's the replacement for Sexton? That's awesome. Okay, we have enough problems. But anyway, so I can't thank you enough for having come here and shared these very, very interesting stories. Thank you very, very much for that. And what I would very much encourage everybody out there watching is to understand this is not an issue only for students. This is not an issue only for professors somehow. This is not an issue only for New York. This is really, really critical, what's going on in NYU. And we have people who have fought tirelessly, such as our poor Andrew Berman. And why? You know, because there are other things that he could really be focusing on. And we have the dedicated faculty who are doing this. I should also mention Mark Crispin Miller, Bo Riccobono, many, many people who are fighting and are valiant students. And they really should be focusing on other things, you know, academia, for example. So I would highly encourage you, one, get informed, join the email list at GVSHP. Also look at markcrispinmiller.com. He's got a lot of really great stuff. Stand Up for NYC. Stand Up and then the number 4. NYC is also a really great link that you should go to. And take the issue personally, because it really is. And thank you so much for joining us.